I'm Dennis Anderson, and here's what's coming up on Almanac North. Can the summer tourism season be salvaged despite restrictions due to the COVID pandemic? We will talk with tourism and business officials about the outlook. News of the Verso paper mill closing in Duluth earlier this month is just a hint of the economic uncertainty in the wood products industry. We will talk with a forest industry official about unprecedented times. And more local attractions open their doors to visitors as COVID restrictions ease. These stories are next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome once again to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. Julie Zenner is off as we continue to alternate hosting during the pandemic. And this week's show was recorded on Thursday afternoon. Well, the region's economy has slowly begun to churn back to life as COVID-19 restrictions are eased. Folks are getting eager now to get out of their homes after several months of isolation. That's a good sign for businesses that depend on travelers. But will it be enough to salvage the summer? Joining us with more on this is Tanski, the president of Visit Duluth, and Kristi Stokes is the president of Duluth's Greater Downtown Council. Good to see you both. Thanks for both of you being on the program tonight. Pretty good topic we're going to be talking about tonight. Anna, your agency has literally been impacted by this COVID-19. You've had to furlough, about a half dozen different employees because of what is this? Why were they furloughed?
Well, we were fortunate to have a strong start to the year, and so we thought things were going to be really that we would be well positioned as we started to enter into COVID. And then the reality that we faced was very similar to those of other businesses. It was just a bit delayed.
Yeah.
And so with limited resources and the city not collecting taxes
less tax dollars coming in,
correct,
which supports your agency.
That is how we are funded, are through lodging tax and food and beverage tax. Mm-hmm. So with those numbers, of course, dramatically on the decline, we had to face the reality that every other business has really encountered.
Anna, we're already getting close now to the end of June. I'm wondering, are we going to be able to salvage the month of June or salvage the tourist season because of what we have seen over the last 30 days?
You know, there are signs of hope, and we monitor it very closely. Each week we receive a report showing us what the hotel occupancy levels are. And gratefully, we're seeing about a 10% increase week over week. Of course, at the low levels that we were at in the 20% range, now we saw 70% on the Saturday of what would have been Grandma's Marathon.
Really?
So we see signs that our industry is emerging, and as more and more of what makes up our industry continues to reopen, we do anticipate that we will see a recovery. And
I want to come back and visit that in just a few minutes. Kristi, with this unexpected pandemic that has hit not only the Northland but certainly the world, this unexpected pandemic has certainly caused problems up and down Superior Street. What are you seeing? Are you seeing any return to any semblance of normalcy at all in Duluth?
You know, it's interesting. I talked to a retailer today who said this week she was really starting to see more people actually walking in the store now. Before it was some orders or some pickups that people were wanting to see. So now you're seeing a little bit more of that consumer confidence. Yeah. You mentioned Superior Street. We have Superior Street reconstruction going on right now, and that's almost taken a back seat because so many people are so worried and so concerned about trying to deal with the pandemic and everything else that's going on. So we haven't had to do as much about the construction as we have in the past. And the construction is going great. It's going well for us. But it hasn't been as much of an impact on the businesses as it has been in the past.
So have downtown businesses been doing some repeat, or are you finding that there has been very few people walking into their doors?
Oh, I think we're seeing a lot coming back now, especially when we're seeing the restaurants. I was in Canal Park today, and there was a
good measuring
lot
tool,
of
isn't
activity.
it, the restaurants?
Yes, and seeing people eating out on the decks. We have beautiful weather this week, so that's been a real boost for us as well. But you're starting to see that. I'm not saying it's back to the levels it should be at, that's for sure. But I think, as Anna mentioned, we're seeing signs of hope.
Yeah. And Kristi, the Greater Downtown Council is now running a series of television commercials touting the downtown business district. They really truly are open and eager to see customers, are they not?
They are, and they're taking all of the precautions necessary. I mean, so many of them have just poured over the guidelines and the documentation and the things that are needed to make sure people feel safe. And that's, I think, the important thing for them to also show that, so people understand when they come into their store or where they come into the restaurant or whatever business, that they know what those parameters are.
You bring up a good point. How are they showing that?
A lot of them have it posted right on the front door. They'll have it on their websites, things like that, and it's just how they demonstrate it as well.
Here's a question the two of you can probably both answer. What are you seeing on the streets in terms of tourism and business activity? What are you specifically seeing?
Well, I can speak to the volume of people that have reached out and requested visitor guides. We weren't sure what to expect, but with people spending a lot more time online, we saw tremendous website activity because all of our information, of course, is available electronically. However, the good old-fashioned printed visitor guide is in high demand, and we've had to pause that now with our furloughs. We anticipate resuming that as soon as we have the resources to do so. But every indication is that there is strong interest, and really, we hope increased interest, because people will stay closer to home, and we want to now have Minnesotans come to Duluth and visit. Of course, that's always been a core part of our visitorship, but we are seeing people still coming from far and wide. Just today, I saw license plates from Missouri and from Kansas. So we know people are traveling, at least within the Midwest.
You mentioned that you're looking at license plates, and I guess a lot of people who are in business do that. Are we finding that people are maybe taking driving vacations this year? They're not flying off to see Aunt Matilda, who lives 4,000 miles away, but instead they're staying closer to home. Are both of you seeing that?
Yeah,
definitely. And research is showing that as well. The consumer index that is being tracked and monitored on consumer behavior and activity really is indicating that within about a 650 to 700 mile radius is the expected travel window for visitors.
And I think what we're seeing too is we are seeing those locals that are saying it's important for me now to help boost our local economy. It's important for me to support our local businesses. When you talk about the downtown workforce, though, I would say that's coming back slowly. We still have quite a few businesses that are working remotely, so we're not seeing that critical mass of employees in the downtown on a daily basis right now, and I think that will be taking us into August or September before we start to see those numbers going back up.
Anna,
you mentioned hotels. That's a pretty good measuring stick, isn't it?
It is, because it's a really real hard data for us. You know, it's not anecdotal, and so we rely heavily on that to show us visitorship. But you know, to Kristi's point, we do see tremendous support from our local residents when it comes to restaurants, when it comes to retail, when it comes to visiting attractions they maybe haven't been out and experienced here in our own backyard. So we're really working together, our organizations, to encourage everyone to get out and experience our city maybe in a way that they haven't recently.
And Anna brings up a good point of working together. So we did team up along with the Duluth Area Chamber of Commerce and the Hermantown Area Chamber of Commerce with the Strong Northland campaign. And so that was specifically aimed at restaurants where people can purchase vouchers that can be good at. It's now 44 restaurants in the Duluth Hermantown area.
Mm-hmm. You told me before you went on the air that you again just recently cut another commercial for the Greater Downtown Council. You're really promoting downtown. Get out and enjoy the downtown.
We are. We're a destination, and we want to make sure that people know that the businesses are open. They're working to make sure that it's safe, and we just want people to know that we miss them and we can't wait to see them.
Yeah. And Anna, Explore Minnesota, which is really the State Tourism Bureau, has just released a new advertising campaign now. Tell us a little bit about what the state does to help bring tourists to the Duluth area, for example.
Well, they've really shifted their focus now within the drive markets as well, based on all of the research and indicators. So for us, that helps tremendously because the markets that Explore Minnesota is going into, Visit Duluth, then can piggyback with our own message. So as people are learning about Minnesota, we then can say, and here's Duluth, Minnesota. And we really shifted our messaging away from some of what we had planned to do originally and created a new message focused on be here. And Lake Superior, it's big enough for everyone. And it has many levels of meaning now more than ever, and we really think it's going to resonate with visitors to come and explore a community that has Mother Nature's way of social distancing.
So what kind of advertising does the city of Duluth do outside of our market area?
We are really focused primarily in the markets that you would probably expect around our region. Twin Cities, number one. But we're into Rochester, Minnesota. We're into Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and Fargo, North Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and we would love to get back into Thunder Bay and Winnipeg when the borders reopen.
Kristi, has there been an uptick in not only the restaurant business, but in other businesses as well, retail trade, for example?
I'd say it's been slow to get back on track for retail trade. I know some that do online have continued to keep their online going, but it hasn't been real sensational. But I think now, as you're starting to see more visitors coming, they're hungry for that. They're hungry to get back into a store and to be able to make an economic impact.
Maybe again you can both address this one. Duluth has been hoping to make this city a bit of a movie capital. We've been trying to attract movies being made here in the city of Duluth, if not on the big screen, at least on the small screen. Are we seeing any success with this, or has the pandemic slowed things down?
Well, actually, in speaking with some officials just yesterday, it's picking up tremendously and gaining momentum. And it's been decades of a lot of hard work by some key individuals that have really put Minnesota on the map. But our area in particular is being seen now as not only a fairly safe and healthy destination, but working toward incentives financially that will basically be sort of that final piece to really encourage that. And we anticipate some pretty significant announcements if all of these pieces come together. So I would say stay tuned on that, Denny. Because
what is it so attractive here?
I would say it literally is the fact that our region has been fairly COVID-free, and they can resume their productions that have been halted in other parts of the country.
Anna Taske, Kristi Stokes, thank you both so very much for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thanks.
The timber industry is one of the 3 T's of the Minnesota economy, and it too has been dealt a blow by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Verso paper plant in Duluth is one of the victims and will be idled at the end of June. The ripple effect of the plant closing will go much further than the 200-plus jobs lost at that mill. Joining us now is Mike Birkeland, the Executive Vice President of Minnesota Timber Producers at Minnesota Forest Industries. Mike, thank you so very much for being here tonight. Mike, I've seen statistics that for every mill job lost, 3 or 4 more jobs are lost in the forest as well. That's quite a blow, really, isn't it?
Yeah, those numbers are right on for paper mills.
Yeah.
You know, the supply chain, the entire supply chain has been affected by this closure. And there's been another mill in Wisconsin Rapids, a Verso plant that was idled as well. And so and some of our wood from Minnesota went there. So there are far-reaching impacts when we're talking about situations like this. Yes, for loggers, for truckers, and for other folks as part of the supply chain.
So Mike, talk to us a little bit about the impact the Verso closing has. First of all, does it look like this is going to be a permanent closing?
Well, I think for Verso, it probably is a situation where they're going to be looking for a new, probably somebody to sell that mill to.
I see.
You know, if we're reading the tea leaves correctly, you know, the local folks in that mill were trying to convert that facility over and to convert it into a different type of product coming out of that mill. They were in the graphics papers market and making inserts for magazines or for newspaper inserts, things like that type of paper. And they wanted to convert over to packaging, which is a real growth sector in the paper markets. And
it certainly isn't just the 200 plus people who work there, is it?
No, we see the impacts. Certainly, you mentioned it in the woods. You know, the Minnesota Timber Producers Association has many members affected by this, and who supplied wood to the mill, balsam and spruce, the primary species, and it was a mill that was primarily using those species, and it's not a predominant species to be used by other mills in Minnesota. So forest health also becomes an issue because if there's no market for those trees, then we, you know, what do you do with them?
And these are entire families that feel the effect.
Yeah, that's the hard part with this whole situation. You know, you've got the employees at the mill, and then you've got the rest of the supply chain and the families that are part of the rest of that supply chain. Suppliers to the mill itself, both on the wood side, but also could be anything from air handling systems to chemicals, you name it, all the way through.
Talk to us a little bit, Mike, as to how large this is going to be felt. I mean, are we feeling the effect only here in northeastern Minnesota, or does it go out beyond that?
Well, the answer to the question varies, and it kind of varies depending on markets. You know, some markets have been impacted severely on the paper side or the wood side, but other sectors of the market, not so much. We don't have tissue plants in Minnesota. We're not making paper towels, things like that. But during this crisis, as you know, and has been reported widely, some of those sectors have just the demand has been amazing. So there are some segments of the industry that are still operating very successfully, and we still have a lot of mills in Minnesota that are still competing and operating very successfully. So that's an important part of the story, but it's always hard when you see one go down.
Yeah. So where does the wood come from when you see a plant such as Verso?
Well, really across a wide swath of northeastern Minnesota. And again, for this mill, it was mostly balsam and spruce that they took in. But there was kind of there's a power plant right next door that burned a lot of wood too, and wood residue. And so that impacts, and that's part of the supply chain that we were talking about. So the ripple effects are, you know, they extend into the woods, they extend to the families that supply wood to the mills and to the employees at the mill too.
What would it take to reinvigorate a mill?
Well, you know, certainly capital investment, and that's not easy, especially in a COVID environment, and that requires approval by a company's board of directors. And I think too that input costs are important for any of these facilities, whether it be the cost of wood, whether it be the cost of electricity, fuels of any sort. That factors into the operating success of these mills in Minnesota, and it's always an important part of the equation.
Talk to us about the size of the logging industry. You know, we hear so much about the mills themselves, but the logging industry has to be fairly substantial.
Well, it is, and you know, to give you a specific count on the number of loggers in Minnesota is probably hard to do right offhand. I'd have to go look at some of the numbers. Well, we're certainly talking probably between 500 and 1,000. Whether you're talking some of the timber producers, the loggers, or the truckers, and and also maybe some of the small mills in the state, you know, and actually probably over 1,000. But I'd have to go back and really look at those numbers. I think the DNR has them on their website. I probably should go back and look after this.
How many mills are there in Minnesota?
Well, as far as the larger mills, which is part of the Minnesota Forest Industries,
Sure.
we still have about. It's hard to say exactly, but in terms of our association, we have 10 mills that are part of our association, or 11 members overall, but 10 that are directly in the forest product sector, and Verso used to be as well.
The state of Wisconsin perhaps as large or smaller than Minnesota?
I think they have a larger paper manufacturing sector yet, but the industry as a whole has been impacted in many ways, shapes, and forms throughout the Midwest over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
It's really been a challenge. You know, there's been a lot of changes with technology. We heard Anna Tanski mention earlier
Right.
about good old-fashioned hard copy brochures
Yes.
that they're sending out right now. And there's still a use for that, and there's
that's-
still an
that's paper.
application there, and we like that, and
Certainly.
there's still a need.
Yeah, that's for sure. Mike, what's the difference between the Minnesota timber producers and the Minnesota forest industries? What's the difference?
Sure. Well, as I like to say, the timber producers are the folks who work in the woods, and the Minnesota Forest Industries, we represent and advocate then for the folks who work in the mills. So we do both, and so it's really part of that, the heart and the soul of the supply chain that starts in the woods with the loggers and the truckers, and then of course you feed the mills with wood, and then you represent those mills. That's what we do too at MFI and TPA. We represent and advocate for those sectors with state agencies, public agencies as a whole, including the U.S. Forest Service and counties as well, and at the legislature.
Is logging a year-round industry?
Well, yes, largely it's a year-round industry. There are times of the year, though, where you're going to stockpile your wood, and spring breakup. It's kind of like the roads in Minnesota, where you're going to you're not going to want to impact the land because of frost coming out of the ground and things like that. So there's less activity in the spring. But overall, it's a year-round activity.
Do loggers get involved in conservation at all?
Absolutely. You know, we have guidelines for forest management in Minnesota.
Tell us about that a little bit.
And so everything to protect water quality, to enhance wildlife habitat, to create conditions for that might create opportunities for recreation, walking trails or even woods trails, things like that. And of course, then you've got just forest management in and of itself. And so you can manage for a wide range of values, and for the sustainability of the forest,
Sure.
and providing products that meet people's needs.
What's the biggest challenge right now facing the timber industry?
The COVID crisis certainly has
Playing a big
thrown
role.
everybody for a loop. You know, it was certainly unexpected. It was, and so then you have to adapt. But the challenge now is, how long will this go? We don't know when we're going to see the other side of this. We don't know how long that will be, and what kind of lingering effects we'll see from a market perspective. And so we've seen a lot of rolling outages and some temporary shutdowns at some of the facilities related to market conditions. And
Once
so,
COVID ends, what else is out there?
well, I think that we're going to be looking at, hopefully we're going to be looking at a situation where we're going to maybe see some reinvestment. We'd love to see some reinvestment maybe in this Verso mill in Duluth here. And maybe it's somebody else who comes in and maybe they convert the facility, maybe they run the machines as they're designed. But that's what I think, if there's a silver lining, that's what it would be at this point, is that the industry begins to grow again in the state.
Is this considered to be a large mill in Duluth?
Well, it's certainly, for Duluth, it's a good-sized mill. Compared to other mills, the Wisconsin Rapids mill was probably 3 or 4 times the size overall in terms of the wood that it took in. And that was a mill that shut down as a result of the Verso announcements as well.
Where in Minnesota is the heaviest amount of logging being done, Mike?
Well, mostly, you know, if you kind of think about Hinckley North, and then you know, the forest land in Minnesota kind of runs at an angle from northwestern Minnesota all the way down to the southeastern point of the state, and there's so much forested region. We got about 17 million acres of forest land in Minnesota.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and we harvest about 1% per year. We grow 3 times more trees than we harvest in a year. So forest management is a big part of that equation, and so, you know, it's a patchwork too of those 17 million acres. So
yeah.
So it's hard to pinpoint exactly, but
Okay.
certainly a big chunk of northern Minnesota.
Mike Birkeland, thank you for telling us this story. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Denny.
Despite major event cancellations this summer due to the pandemic, local attractions are beginning to reopen. Many are instituting new protocols to keep visitors safe as they enjoy their facilities. One example is Duluth's Glensheen, which reopened its mansion with self-guided one-way tours and reduced capacity this week. And the North Shore Scenic Railroad tours will resume from the Duluth Depot beginning next week on July 1st. The depot will also reopen to the public that day. Train excursions will feature reduced capacity to allow for proper physical distancing. With so much to keep up with, you can count on Almanac North for in-depth discussion of the issues important to all of us. And you can follow us on our social media sites if you happen to miss a show. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And visit the WDSC website for program updates, upcoming events, and more information about special programming here at the television station. And speaking of special programming, WDSC is continuing a series of programs on racism. If you're watching this show live on Friday, stay tuned for Almanac North Focus on Systemic Racism, tonight at 8:30, hosted by journalist Robin Washington. And thanks to our guests and the crew here in the studio. I'm Dennis Anderson. Stay healthy, everyone, and be kind.